You wouldn't have known how long it was there. It was longer than I would have liked. There was a million places of what I'd rather been, but I was stuck there. Over and over I waited through the days. It seemed like, to me, they wanted me to be there, because I was crazy. But it seemed I was going crazy from being there. The doctors would continue to talk with me, but nothing they were saying seemed to be quite true. Like really, true. They were all damn bores, to tell you the truth. They would often tell me they don't know what's wrong with me, and they would squint their eyes at me and place their hand on their chin, and probably think I was quite a messed up teenager. It was no matter. After a while, I thought I would do anything to get out of there. I was scared sometimes, to tell you the truth. Like maybe they'd think I was crazy forever. I had a lot of time to sit around and lay around and think. I could think of a million ways to get out of there. And I tried every one. No one worked. But one day I started journaling and I was really starting to put my thoughts together, I swear. I really thought I got to show this to the doc after a while. It was really great stuff. Meetings with him happened at 11 a.m. and I was all worked up. I had to tell him I was better. I walked into his office and I took a nice relaxed posture in the chair with one foot up, ready to tell him all about the things I'd come up with. Holden, you need to start telling the truth, for your own sake. That's really besides the point, and really, I just need to tell you about the things I've been writing. It's really changed my life, Doc. Promise. Holden, I don't want to hear about what you've been doing. I care to know how you are improving. Well, I really am. I'm doing better every day. It's the diaries I'm writing, see. I got all my thoughts down on paper. And from there, I think about how it relates to my life. See, they were just these stories. Kind of like my life. But not really my life. Like adventures, through all the different places on Earth and different worlds. It's like my life, but as if it was lived all over. Holden, you cannot be indulging your fantasies. You need to ground yourself in reality. This is not a healthy use of your time. These stories are going to get mixed up with your real life. You are supposed to be using it to gather yourself together. It really is okay. I feel much better. Stories help me see my life from a different lens, and everything isn't so boring and crap, and things go better. I just need to make my life more interesting. I need to include all of these different worlds in my life. Yeah, and you already mentioned them. Reality. But look, Doc, what's the importance of reality without stories? I think if you just think of the past, present, and future, you don't make sense of them. You have nothing that makes sense. Stories combine them for you, and you can see how things happen. That's what I do with my writing, and I can see how things happen and make sense of things. What event caused the next event? It gives me clarity. Holden, the clarity comes from the basic facts of the situation. As I said, you needed reality. If you have the facts, you can understand the situation. Holden, skies always lack proper understanding of what they perceive. They often understand things differently than how they actually are. You need to stay with it. Use reason and information to guide you in understanding how to react in a more normal way. I've been working on being more normal. I really am trying to control my behaviors like a lot more. And maybe that will help me to interact more normally. I really am not weird, I don't think. I hope not. I really don't mean to misinterpret what people say to me. I really don't mean to offend people, if that's what it is that is wrong. Sometimes people get so angry at me, and sometimes they act like I went and embarrassed them. Maybe I'm wrong to think all that, but it sure isn't nice. It makes a guy uptight. How do you mean misinterpret what people say? I mean like they said one thing, and I thought they meant another thing. And usually it really is the case. I thought they meant to say something that was really supposed to hurt me. Half the time, even now, I'm not sure if they hadn't meant to really offend me, like I was really hurt. I really don't know if those feelings were inside of me, or if they were not, or if they were things not quite happening inside but around me. Like my feelings were affecting everything I was seeing and feeling around me. Like I don't know, maybe you know what I'm talking about. Like everything mattered intensely. No, Holden, I don't know what you mean. I think you're not making sense. Perhaps try again. Or allow me. Your emotions were spiraling. Holden, you need to stay rational. Yeah, so you always say. I'm always trying that. Pretty sure I'm being rational. But you don't believe me. I really even try. I really even am rational. Well, Holden, that is hardly true. That is the opposite of what I told you. Yeah, agree to disagree then. I'm not sure you're always making sense, Doc. Of course I am, Holden. What a ridiculous accusation. Of course you aren't. No one's making sense 100% of the time. That's crazy. Like, Doc, you're crazy. That's not right. I can tell you why. We don't know the truth about anything. Like everything that there is out there. I suppose 2 is 2, and a fork is a fork. But is there a God? We don't know, right? I got you there, Doc. But Holden, God is real. That is entirely true. But Doc, I thought you were a man of reason. Surely you would know there is no reason to think God is real. How does that hold up with your beliefs? God is perfectly rational. He exists. Everything else that I know to be true is obviously true. There is no reason to doubt God's existence at all. But surely you don't believe all that stuff. The universe probably just started on its own. Like atoms and stuff. It just started expanding. Quite a lot of that stuff isn't true. Having sex isn't going to send you to hell. God was maybe even a racist, and he really didn't even treat women fairly. Hey, why is a woman responsible for ruining the world? That wasn't what was fair. Women are just the same as us. No, they are not, Holden. They are inferior. What about the rest of what I said? About what? About God and atoms and things. There's hardly any evidence for any of that. And the story of creation is correct anyways. But it really isn't, and scientists already proved this. There isn't anything that happened at all. Come on, like, God invented the world in a day and stuff. Like, yeah, right. It is not ridiculous, and do watch yourself for speaking that way, Holden. Everyone has every right to believe what is true, which is the story of creation. Oh, okay, then agree to disagree then. I was just saying this is all kind of lame. You need more concepts and stuff to describe the things you want to describe your feelings and stuff. It is not agree to disagree. What I said is quite fact, Holden. God invented the world, and believing otherwise is incorrect. Holden, are you not in touch with reality? Yeah, I'll give him a call next week. No, I am. Hey, listen, Doc. Maybe you aren't. Of course I am. Yeah, well, this conversation is getting lame. Can we end it there? Yes, in fact, our time is up. Well, okay. I got up and spit out of there. Holden, what's wrong, he asked. Well, the law ended an hour ago. Later that afternoon, there wasn't very much to do. I sat around watching movies with the other people in this place with me. I'm a lot critical, though. I'm not going to get into it with you, because I told you a lot about the movies I like already. You remember the last time I was writing you. They were movies from years ago, like 5 years ago, even 10 years ago. I guess they weren't really very interesting to watch. I really just decided in the end to go read some. I was quite reading Look Homeward Angel, and quite getting into it. Though I wondered from page to page what this was for, what that was for. I think if I was going to write a book, I'd make it really short, and like poetic, make every word count. It didn't really seem to matter to add a bunch of other words. People would appreciate that. It would take less time to read. I guess maybe it wouldn't necessarily be harder. The better a book, the more I'd appreciate it. It's hard to tell how the whole society feels. On the whole, people are lazy. On the whole, people like things really nice. Style doesn't take away from quality, but maybe length doesn't add to quality. I do mean to say, maybe length doesn't mean more better content. I guess it does mean more content. I would take a nap some days in the hospital, but today I didn't feel like it. It seemed like it would take away from the feeling of having a full day. Not that those days when you're there feel full necessarily. It just made it seem like I'd done nothing at all, when I really ought to have done something, I guess. After that, I continued with some of my journaling, and it was really helping me to get my thoughts out on paper. I was finding ways to look differently at my experiences before coming here, and it made me feel more accepting of everything that had happened. There's always a consequence for our actions. I understand that now. Like, no matter what choice, there's a consequence. I guess not all consequences are good, and that's very easy to acknowledge. But there will be reactions because of every action, I guess. I didn't know if I believed in free will now as opposed to before. I guess all of my actions could have been predetermined. But really there was no God. Maybe my whole personality inside me was exactly the way it was because of who I was, like because of my genes, as if my thoughts are determined by my genes. It probably only was the case that my thoughts are a little influenced by my genes. I definitely can have my own thoughts and make my own decisions, and because of that I have the choice to make a good or a bad decision. I guess I didn't feel responsibility for my actions, but maybe I just hadn't thought enough about them. I hadn't really thought enough about the choices. So that was a way I could improve. I wasn't sure if this doc and I would ever see eye to eye though. It was difficult to think that we would ever even get along. All this work would help me get on out of here and start being someone living their life again, and hopefully really well. I guess if he didn't come to see eye to eye with me, then I would just have to try to convince him we are on the same page. It probably won't be that difficult. Sometimes you have to fake it a bit. Not that that's okay. It's a lot okay if you don't break the law, and you really need to do it to help yourself get out of an unfair situation. So getting out of this place, it had to happen after. When really, I put a stop to this fight between me and this doc. Really, he's just giving me a hard time. I could deal with it really, but the situation is, I really have to get out of here. As I was lying down, I was thinking about all these things. People in the hospital were very strange. I could hear people making strange noises, as if they were having a dream, as if they were in a horror movie. Occasionally, you could even hear someone talking to themselves, more than mumbling. It was even a little scary. I didn't hope they were okay. I really hoped they'd stay away from me. I suppose no one would touch me. If someone did, at this point, I would defend myself. I wanted to live by now. I really did. Sometimes they ask me if I wanted roommates. This is why I always say no thank you. People out there can be really creeps. And there are quite a few in this hospital that probably wouldn't be people I'd even really want to sit down with, let alone sleep in the same room with. I guess I just needed to wait for the next appointment to come. Then I'd have my chance. I thought I'd probably had it all figured out. I probably knew all the moves that I had needed to get out of here. Hi, Holden. Yes, come in. Hi, Doc. So what have you been thinking about the last 2 days? I hear you have been quiet. Is that a good thing, Doc? Why, yes, Holden, it is. I would say I believe it's a good thing. Well, thank you. Is that a display of good mental health? Yes, it is. It is controlled. You have behaved yourself. Was I too much in my room? No, you were not at all. Yes, what is it? Well, you had watched a lot of movies. Was there something wrong with this? No, they're not full of the best messages for people. I suppose it was all right, though. You certainly were being occupied. I was occupying myself, so it seems like I hit all the bases. Well, not quite. There are more elements to consider. There are aspects of your personality that I'd like to correct. There is more we could do here. My personality doesn't seem like anything you need to worry about. I wouldn't want to be here any longer. Then you need to be. Did you mean? No, I meant period. Well, that's not quite something I can do right now. It will require more time to make all these issues better. But well, never mind. So what do you not like about my personality? Your sarcasm. I see. What else? Well, for one, I do not appreciate how talkative you are. Holden, you talk and talk. Well, that is not true. I am perfectly controlled. It's not a conversation to be had around here. Yes, but aren't you quite the talkative person when you are not around here? Well, I don't deny being a person that would talk a lot. I suppose you wouldn't believe I've changed. In this short amount of time, a change like that seems not likely. Yeah, I've really been working on it, watching what I say. I see. Well, that actually leads me into my next point. Something I observe about your behaviors. You're insubordinate, Holden. Not only do you talk constantly, you often do things that were completely at your whim. I would say I may not think before I speak, though I think before I do. That's for certain. And do you really believe that, Holden? I would say it's true. I wouldn't swear at my grandmother's grave, though. No, I don't recommend doing that. Well, thank you. I hope she is sleeping well. I suppose that was euphemism. It was. Then good. And really, Holden, do you have a problem with the way everyone else behaves? The way everyone else behaves? You mean like you feel everyone has one way of behaving? Well, of course. Everyone except for the mentally ill. Like you, Holden. And criminals. There's a proper way to behave. Everyone follows the rules. Well, I get it. Like decorum. No, Holden. A way to act all the time. Your personality is, I must say, not right. What do you mean? Everyone's allowed to have their own personality. What made you think that, Holden? Everyone must have a personality that's agreeable to everyone else. There is the one ideal personality. I think I might have the wrong office. Don't go anywhere, Holden. Okay, so there are right behaviors in every situation. Of course, there are. It's while you are here that you have to learn them. But how? Well, he took off his glasses. Like he was a very sensitive and quietly intelligent man. I suggest you watch the staff. Observe how they behave and act exactly how they act. And if they are not around, and observe one of the patients, they're not as sick as yourself, and act like them. That would be what I would do, Holden, if I were you. And should I act like you? Well, Holden, I've given you several people to act like. That should be enough. But failing that, I suppose you could act like me. Do you think you could handle that? Are you this great personality? I thought all personalities are the same. No, I am not. And they are all exactly the same. Consider me a perfect exemplar of the exactly correct behaviors. I see. Well, all right, Mr. High and Mighty. I'll try that a little. The other thing you said about the staff, I would have told them anything to get out of that place. But try observing the staff and behaving as they do. Of course, I just said I would. Good. I just wanted to be clear. Yeah, we are clear. It's funny, I wasn't aware there was a correct way to behave. Oh yes, why of course there is. Etiquette has long been developed. It is meant to make society flow the most harmonious way possible, as if it were controlled by God himself. It is, you know. Oh, for sure. I wonder if you've heard of the decay of morals. That is not true. They are continually progressing towards absolute perfection. People like yourself only need to fall in line. If they're so perfect, why hasn't it occurred to me to follow them exactly before? People like yourself are not seeing things properly. You all are not well. Allow me to heal you. Well, okay. I thought that was what we were already doing here. No, we are still in the process of healing you. There was more to address, you see? I do sort of see what you're saying. How many more of these points do you think there will be, Doc? Not that many. That was the major one. Perhaps it was the last one. But it will take some time for you to adjust. Well, of course. In time, I will fall in line. Don't think of it as falling in line. Think of it as becoming a functional person again. Someone as sick as yourself should be seen as a gift. People rarely recover. So you think I'm someone that will likely recover? I really think I could get better, you know, and things. Yes, Holden, I am very good at what I do. You are lucky. With me, you could get a lot better. You could become all the way better, perhaps. It is rare that we see this in my field, but I think you have the chance to really, you quite have the chance to really recover. Thanks, Doc. Well, here's the part where we say we are done here, you know. It's been great and all. Yes, Holden, we are done now. All right, thank you then. Bye, Holden. See you. The next day I decided to put the Doc's theory to test. Did I believe in it? I hadn't at all. But that didn't mean that it wasn't a good way to get on his good side. It wouldn't be so hard to pretend a few of these behaviors had rubbed off on me. The staff were not going to be so difficult to act like. So while I was sitting around having coffee in the late morning, I started observing some of the behaviors of the nurses around. They actually had an air of indifference. So I suppose I was not going to copy that. I would ignore that, pretend I hadn't noticed. The thing was, they said the same thing to everybody in the hospital. Hi, how are you doing? And how are you feeling today? Any problems with the medication? I think they were supposed to smile, but they almost never did. It seemed like more than once they let out a faint grimace, though their behaviors were quite constrained, and that was something to be observed. They weren't necessarily controlled, they were minimal, well, to be honest, even lazy. But I got it. They didn't like fidgeting and things. Everything needed to be perfectly docile. I suppose that's why so much venom seeped through all of their little behaviors. They never moved quickly, and they took many breaks. And they only chatted with each other, and they really complained to each other. So that was behavior I didn't need to copy as well. As the day went along, I noticed they did all of their work indifferently, but they really took pride in how everything had become very routine for them. So doing things with efficiency, and meanwhile taking your time. I wasn't sure how well this was going to go. I decided I might observe some of the other staff, and see what they did differently than these nurses, as there might be aspects of their behavior that, though routine, also varies from the one standard of behavior. As these nurses were definitely a little unhappy. The cafeteria workers seemed to do things more efficiently, so that was a great trait to learn to copy. Though at the end of the day, they seemed sadder, and maybe a lot madder at what the position required. Administration staff answered the phone with disdain, though they even more so said the same things, time after time. Maybe this life was like a job. I suddenly realized I had a position as the nicest person in the world. I figured I'd try out some of these behaviors amongst the other people in the hospital. When I tried it on the nurses, things didn't go quite as well as I wanted. They seemed almost able to tell what I was trying out on them. It really was okay, though if you judged by their reaction, you might have thought it was an indignation to someone out there, maybe another nurse they knew. I tried asking them questions about things around the building, and when they answered, eventually, I'd reply thank you, like they hadn't done anything wrong at all. When they asked me how I was feeling, how I was reacting to my medications, I would answer with a bit of technical knowledge, as if I were another one of the nurses. I suppose it didn't annoy them, not as much as my random inquiries into the things going on around the building. They really only
Alright, we'll try
strange, wondering what had me so excited, or whatever. Though, when they did answer, there was still quite a bit of that usual disdain for their work, for all the people around considering them only someone doing their job, only they really probably don't love anymore. Glenda said she hated the job after a year, and most of the other staff agreed. She was the nurse I found the most interesting. I suppose I didn't have a favorite. And then I tried it on some of the patients. They weren't quite as bothered by my questions. I asked old Howard how his porridge was. "It's all right," he answered. "Good," I answered. Maybe that was too hospital worker-like, and not even quite universal enough. Yes, I tried. "Would you recommend the porridge to me?" "No," he said, "I would not." "Oh, well, all right," I replied. "Good day to you," I said. He only replied with a bit of a grumph. I thought I'd try again. "Good day, Howard." Finally he answered. "Good day, Holden." "Thank you," I said, "and keep in mind I am only sitting next to you." "I was aware, Holden." "Of course," I said. "Of course." Overall, they hadn't really worked. They sort of had. I think I learned more about how to behave in the one way, if one could learn such a thing, than I had previously thought I would. I figured I wouldn't learn anything, so I figured I could tell the doctor it went really well, and that I was really getting it, and that would get me on the fast track out of this place. People weren't really acting in just one way, so I really still disagreed with the doctor. There definitely was conformity that people were fitting into. I never thought of conformity as a good thing, or a right thing, and I'd say it will help if everyone behaves and also does the same things, so things run smoothly. Really, I felt like that was not very good. It was better to be original. But maybe some people didn't know how to be original. The only thing I felt differently now is that sometimes you had to be not so original. Just fit in. Maybe in a way, that would cause less ruckus. Then no one would be saying, "Hey, why are you being so original?" when we're all just acting the same. Originality was to be cherished, but maybe you shouldn't stick it in people's faces. Well, they don't like to hear they're not as good as you, and whatever else. Being the same as everyone else is not my style, though that was what I was describing. That's what I always wanted not to do. But if it could get me out of here and on to the next thing, then it'd be a heck of worth it, I think. Everyone who would care to know would tell you I am no phony. Hope there's lots of phonies reading this. That's cool. My appointment with the doctor came around. It was only the next day. I walked in and sat right down on the seat and hoped he didn't misinterpret my eagerness to be over with it as eagerness for psychotherapy. I a lot didn't want to be psychoanalyzed. "Hello, Holden," he said to me. "Hi, Doc. What's the latest?" "I want to see how you're doing. See how we're moving along." "Very well, sir." I tried to answer right normal. "Things are going awesome. I feel really well, sir." "Okay, that's good," he said. "Tell me why," he added. "Well, you see, Doc," I started out, "I've been trying out that thing you suggested, acting normal, just like other people, other normal people, you know. I think it's really been changing me. I'm much better adjusted." "Is that so, Holden? And how have you been behaving more normally, like other people, Well, I can't explain. I had been observing behaviors of the nurses and some of the other staff. I could easily tell there were some ways they were behaving that if I behaved in those ways, they would be very useful for me being normal. It's been great. I tried it out on some of the patients and most of the staff. I've been very, very normal. Nothing wrong, nothing not normal at all. Nothing weird, you say? No, not at all, Doc. I see that, Holden. That you are behaving very, normally. Yes. Yeah, totally and wholly. I've been so normal. It's been an adjustment, Not a big one. But it's been a change, Why, yes, of course. You had some strange behaviors. Oh, well, yeah. All gone now. I see. Well then, why am I keeping you here? It seems you're all better. I truly am. I feel ready to try living my life more normally. I mean, taking all these things I learned and, everything I learned from you to really start my life much more normally and responsibly. He really seemed titillated with that one, and he replied, yes, splendid idea. Apply all of these new ideas to your real life. And he went on to, good. Now, Holden, what have you learned from here? Any lessons that you would like to take on with you? Well, geez, sir, I don't know. Not that I can think of, Well, I can think of one. I really think I ought to behave more normally all the time, Doc. He smiled lightly at me. Why, yes, splendid. Quite splendid. If there was things I had to teach you, it was the importance of normal behavior. That is absolutely what I learned. Well then, it seems my work is done here. Holden, as of tomorrow, you are free to go. Thanks, Doc. I couldn't thank you any more. You're welcome, Holden. I think you will do quite well, assuming you remember these lessons. Thanks again, Doc. Can I go now? Why, of course. See you, Holden. I walked out of there, back to my sleeping quarters. The next morning, I woke up and gathered all my things together. Fit everything I could in my backpack, and the rest in my suitcase. Then I waited for them to come and grab me, to catch my taxi to the train, so I could get back to New York. It was only supposed to be a few more minutes. It was only 2 minutes later. Someone came to my room, a nurse, and she told me I had arrived. She escorted me down the stairs into the front entrance. Then I walked to the taxi cab, put myself in the truck, and stepped in. Then the driver put it in drive and drove off, towards the train station, with me in the back seat. Outside, across the dull-colored lake, Amory could see the other cabins. A single light shone from the middle one. The other two stood illuminated only in effervescent gleam. He wondered what the inhabitants were up to. Otherwise, there was nothing to occupy one's mind out here in the country. It was unpleasant being home in Minnesota, but such was the times. The depression had been the curved ball in everyone's plans, Amory figured. For him, otherwise he would have been the CEO of the advertising company his dad had purchased a small share in by 1930. It was 1933 now, and Amory found himself scribbling novels to try and pay the bills. Strangely, he was chasing artistic vision, trying to create something that would last forever, and people would surely die to have. Sitting alone at night, when it wasn't too cold around the lake, he would wonder whether it wasn't an unachievable task to create a novel of prose as beautiful as a work of poetry. He wondered to himself why Byron's qualities slipped in Childe Harold, and why Keats' Endymion seemed to fall short of the aspirations of the greatest poet. And when he said we were all doomed to failure, in a sense, as an artist, was he supposed to create the greatest possible failure, to create the nearest thing to art, or was he supposed to do something else entirely? The problem was the audience, the young women, the young men who would read his novels. Could he sell them a book of poems? He feared he couldn't. It was the dirty tricks of the genre of the novel, the suspense, the drama that pulled them in. They only wanted a story of love they could see themselves in if everything went perfect. They only needed escape, and art offered a mirror that reflected reality, or so wrote Shakespeare. It was so long he had been someone trying to live his life like a novel. The first couple of novels came easy. And he had sold successfully, despite the growing recession. Americans hadn't accepted the recession was here for a while, and they had bought things at first. Then things worsened, and people would only spend on what was absolutely necessary. It was possible to sell some copies of novels still, or some Emery heard. The end result was impossible to discern, but he hoped in his heart that he and Ginevra would find enough from it to finance their life. Even as he saw through the lies that this was the very best life. The problem was he had used so much of their relationship the first two books that they had in a way described the honeymoon. It was a time before pressure. It was a time before she knew he would write the books. Now everything that happened between them, she wondered whether it would show up in a novel. And Amory knew this. The power to write a gripping novel could come at the expense of the happiness of his marriage. Ginevra was as dear to him as anything on earth, as his child, as his father had been when he was a boy. Though what would be enough money to make them happy? Amory was completely lost in thought, Ginevra observed. But when she approached him, he was instantly aware of her, and he gave her his full attention as soon as he turned around and saw her. "Ginevra, what is it?" "It's nothing other than that Richard called, and he said to bring the boy. His kids request a play date before dinner. I see. The other lodgers request a party. Well, we'll be there longer than a dinner. We are highly sought after company." "Well, nothing ever changes, especially out of New York. He is sought after company himself. He's quite the doctor." "Well, exactly. He's the best ever, they say." Yes. Later that afternoon, they set off on the single-lane road that ran along the lake to the other cabins. Amory and Ginevra sat in front, and their boy, Archer, sat in the back silently. Amory had only one drink before they left to make sure he was in the mood when they arrived. In his day, it was normal to drink lots. People were unaware of the consequences of drinking alcohol and did not temper their intake of it. He drove a little slowly, conscientious of the precious cargo in the back. He cared about his son's health. He was a link to the future. Other than his writing, his son would be the only thing to carry his legacy forward. Archie was very likable, and he fit into the family plans nicely. The road curved and curved around the lake. The car moved at a gentle pace of 15 miles an hour, and they reached the other cabins in 20 minutes. Amory approached the cabins, driving past the nearest one, and parking his car directly in front of the middle cabin, where Richard and his family resided. He turned off the engine, and he and Ginevra exited the vehicle. She helped the baby out of his seatbelt and then lifted him to the ground. They walked up to the porch where Richard had opened the door since their car arrived and was already waiting. "Hello, Amory," he said, grinning warmly. "Hello, Ginevra," he said. "Richard, the great doctor," Amory replied. "Perhaps," Richard replied, "and Amory, the great writer." "Most certainly, Richard," replied Amory. "Most certainly." Richard directed them inside, taking their coats off, before passing them off to a housemaid. He led them to the sitting room, where waiting for them was his wife Rosemary and their daughter, Rosaline. "They've been waiting to see you all day, Amory," Richard said. "We sort of had," said Rosemary. She stood and greeted Amory and Ginevra with 2 kisses on the cheeks each. Rosemary was an incredibly beautiful woman, only 22. Richard had courted her on the Riviera of France, falling in love with her youthful looks and good-heartedness. And upon returning to the mainland, he had eventually looked her up while traveling to her city, and had then truly fallen in love. Their daughter was 3 years old and remarkably healthy looking. She seemed like she would grow to be just as beautiful a woman as her mother. The 3 of them sat down together, and the housemaid led the 2 children off to the play area, where there were some toys and puzzles for them to have fun with. Richard had hardly looked old, though he was presently 37 years old. His previous marriage had worn on him in the end, though past the extreme stress of it, he had found new health and vitality. Out of the scorching sun of the Riviera, his skin regained a shiny, less wrinkled look, and the beaten, burned look of the sun disappeared. Though he had been drinking a lot with his mates on the Riviera, he had found new sobriety back in America. He reserved drinking only for very special occasions. He no longer drank at lunch in his garden, or at a nightly dinner party with his 2 fellow expat mates and their wives, or attended every party in town. He had found a new sobriety now in the quiet peace of the Midwest, of more isolated and boring places. As he began chatting with Anne-Marie in Geneva, he wondered whether he would have a few drinks, or just one. He felt no need to match Anne-Marie, who he could tell had already had a drink before he came. It occurred to Richard that it was obviously only for the purpose of loosening up slightly. All the same, Amory was a remarkably intelligent and sophisticated young man, while you could tell when he was drunk. Amory still behaved in a very respectable manner. And that was the thing about the ski hill, Amory was saying. Although he reached the bottom in one piece, there was no doubt about that. The moguls had absolutely tired you out by the end of it. Amory and Richard had been skiing together in the nearby mountains. It was a feat of athletic strength and endurance, although it was fun. Gaining speed as you went down the hills was perhaps just as fun for Richard and Amory as most other riders. That you don't get hurt traveling down that hill at those speeds, Amory, is remarkable. Why, thank you, Richard, but the fact is the way you ski makes you seem more of a young Hercules than an old man. Amory, I am hardly an old man. Though I know as well the feeling of being the center of attention. Popularity does tend to be something for younger folk. For an older gentleman, you are quite popular, even off the Riviera, and your retirement from the party world. No one will ever do it quite like Dick Diver had. It was funny, Richard thought. No one had called him that since he left France. This Amory had seemed to know more about things than most people. Richard figured he'd shrug it off. It was only a minor annoyance. Will you be returning to New York, Amory, given the atmosphere with its economic depression and whatnot? Well, eventually, Richard. To be honest, I'm supposed to be writing every day, but sometimes I have lost faith. What I'm writing is the next big thing. So I even begin a new story. One day, the economic conditions and the conditions of my soul will be right for a return to New York. I honestly don't want to go back yet. It's always the same people and all the same restaurants. Yes, there are some arguments for us to return to New York at an even later date, Amory said. I see. I'll actually be moving along soon. My residency at the college is ending, Richard said. My book is almost finished. I just finished the last essay. Now I'm working on revisions. Well, we will miss you, Amory said. That it is not the same here without you is for sure a fact. So, Amory said, what is that your book was about? Remind me? While I'm familiar with your work, yet I have not asked much about your project. You seem so immersed in it. Now that it is finished, at least the writing, what is the new contribution? Richard sat back, sighing, and pondering how to answer the question. Well, thank you, Amory. I had not been trying to keep it a secret to my friends, but I preferred not to reveal too much information about it, if I didn't have to tell you the truth. Richard scratched his chin. Well, I have been writing every morning, perhaps most afternoons. He was clean-shaven always, and was always taking care of himself. The idea that it is going to blow people's minds is not necessarily originating in the human brain, but now it is there. It is very there, and it will always be. But it originated in myths. It is the archetype. Then we felt a little color drain from his face, though we felt excitement at the same time. He wished that he had been the psychiatrist that discovered this. Though this had very little to do with his field, he had already understood the idea as soon as Richard had said the word archetype. Richard, that sounds absolutely brilliant. How do you think of such a thing? Amory asked. Well, Amory, I owe some appreciation to you, because it was through becoming friends with you that I found I quite enjoy your work. You see, I have been quite interested in these archetypes for many years, and when I found them in your books, I knew right away that I had found something that stretched through almost all of human existence, since the very first story was told on Earth. There have always been these figures that we associate with people we meet in the world, and they can be traced back to the early myths. There is the Great Mother, the trickster, the old wise man, the hero. I suppose my work may have as much impact as much of an impact on literature as on psychology, but I am excited all the same. Amory felt it sounded almost exactly like he had imagined it when Richard defined it, but he knew he had never thought of it before. He was not jealous. There was a missed opportunity to not be a philosopher, a thinker, he realized. A writer could easily be a creator of ideas and a great philosopher. This would be his discovery, that he would begin creating ideas to branch himself out of the art that he seemed to make just for people to consume and forget about, sometimes, no matter how good he was. This will be a significant event in psychology and philosophy. He has stumbled upon research that explains all aspects of humanity to us for the first time, Amory said. To think that our minds could be shaped by stories, fascinating. Yes, there are certain thoughts that automatically appear in the unconscious mind of all humans now, that originated only in stories that we had made for each other to explain our world for ourselves. That seemed to be about the whole of the idea. Amory thought about asking more about it, but he feared sounding out of his depth. There was nothing more to ask about it. Having read nothing about it, I would sound intelligent. Amory decided to ask, Richard, will the dinner being prepared be finished soon? My wife and I are hungry. We haven't eaten anything since lunch in preparation. It was just finished. It is prepared now. It is up to you when we shall eat. Would you like to have dinner now? When they sat down at the dining table, everything was placed except for the main course. Amory took a sip of wine, and before he finished it, he could see the maidservant bringing out the dinner. There were 4 plates on the tray, and she set it down near the edge of the table. She served the guests first, and then she served Richard and Rosemary next. They were a beautiful couple together. Nicole had no idea they were together, and it was for her own protection, because of her tendency to be mentally frail, that these connections in America were kept secret from her. The truth seemed to be that Richard had fallen madly in love with Rosemary. She seemed to be everything Nicole was not. She was healthy, especially in mind, and she was youthful and happy. Nicole had grown old, and she had become worried and deceitful. Richard eventually realized he missed Rosemary so much that it was making him feel pain. In his melancholy, he had lashed out verbally at his partner for the first time, and his drinking had only made it worse. And she had imagined, quite frankly, that he was like her. Nicole could not see that the people around her would not break down over time, especially doctors. They would have growth. Richard's career as a doctor was only beginning, and in many ways, as a man of advice and as a man of conversation, the legend was only beginning. Amory immediately commented on the amazing quality of the meal. This is exquisitely prepared, Richard. Where had you found such a recipe? Must have been the most exotic of sources. Why, thank you, Amory. You're welcome. So tell me, what does one make when they are selling books of ideas? I'm interested in hearing about that. Well, I suppose the truth is that it depends on the worth of the idea. You have to convince people at home that it's worth their time, and it's going to change their life in some remarkable way. And you have to convince the scholars that their students need to read the book. That's an important market, and the students will rebuy the books every year. You need to prepare more articles so over the years, each group of students can study the ideas in more depth. They have different requirements from reading than the average reader. Of course, Amory thought about his books and what that meant in literature. Could he write analysis of his own books? Or if he got John Peel Bishop, his close friend, to write analysis for him, would it have the same effect that Richard was talking about? You know, I have seen these books sometimes, but they don't really announce the numbers. How much could you expect to make? I would say you could expect something similar to your genre, and anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000 in upfront sales. After that, you may see some continued sales of $1,000 per year, or even $2,000 or $3,000 if you throw in the colleges and universities. Amory's mind exploded with ideas for his book. If he could somehow get $1,000 or $2,000 to buy his book every year, why, the possibilities were endless. The upfront money, that was enough for a mansion, but the problem was always having nothing left after. If he could have that, that would be enough for he and Geneva to live comfortably. And if you wrote another successful book or two, then they would live forever in riches and joy. That's outstanding, Richard. He decided to jump into it, and to make it all about himself. Do you think anyone would ever be interested in literary analysis? If we analyzed my books like I was a classic writer, like Shakespeare? I think that would work. There's a large demand for literature. Many students take English courses, where they read analysis of literature. If you could have your books accompanied by lots of analysis, available in separate essays, or books of essays, then that would encourage professors to use your books for their lectures. Why yes, this would work. Sometimes they study modern books. They love Pound and Hemingway. If I could convince them my work was as good, they would teach it. There are not that many modern writers that are already considered great. I agree. You wanted me to analyze your writing? I am already a reader, but I'm afraid I am only in psychological analysis right now. You, Richard? Why did I say that? Emery thought to himself about it. He had not meant to say that at all, but the possibility was so tantalizing. Why, I would love that. That would help so much. A man of your regard. All right, you have my word. Richard Diver, a man of literary psychoanalysis now, as well. Wow, fascinating. The new man of literary psychoanalysis had a charm about him so enticing, he forgot after a while that you had felt lured by the strength of the charm in the first place. You were positively intoxicated by the power of his charm. It'd be delightful if you accompanied Rosemary and I on our ski trip this weekend. We would love to have you. After he said it, he looked Amory in the eyes and smiled extraordinarily warmly. There was a smile of that touch of subtlety, not too large, not too forced, that always filled it with an authentic, seeming charm. We don't have any plans this weekend. Geneva, darling, would you like to go with them? Why, I'm not sure. It would be marvelous fun. Yes, I think that would be all right. Yes, Amory said. The housekeeper can watch the children again. Richard, we are in for that adventure. Most excellent, Richard said. Most excellent. He began eating and finished a few forefuls before he spoke again. And then do you think you'll be returning to New York, Amory? Amory looked at Richard trustingly and tried to say what approximately their plans were. Why, yes, we will be returning in the fall. In just a couple months. Then I will publish my book, assuming it is done, and we will return to society life, hopefully being once again the talk of the town of New York. That all sounds marvelous, Richard said. You've started your new book, yes? How's that going? Amory was slightly choked up, thinking of how to reply. After a moment or two, he said, well, yes, I have started it. I made it through 50 pages. On a previous draft, I made it through 100 pages, then threw it out. It was trash. This one, I made it through 50. It's better. But I'm not sure it's good enough. If you are stuck now, might I offer a suggestion? Why not use psychological theory in your novel? You should use that to crack the plot of the novel. He was so good at giving advice, it was like a scam. Amory thought about what he had said and replied, that sounds good, but if you could explain more, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Certainly, Richard said. What if your characters are driven by deep psychological motivations, explained by psychoanalysis? And what if the plot hinged on their psychological motivations? If the mystery of the novel involved figuring out what their psychological motive was? Amory felt his eyes water slightly. It was the best idea he had ever heard. Why, Richard, that is brilliant. Never have I had such a good idea, and this is the second time tonight I have thought that. Thank you, Amory. That means a lot to me, Richard said. You're welcome, Richard. So what would be your idea for a first certain bestseller? Richard considered for a moment, then he said, my idea would be fit the bill for both a bestseller and a literary smash. What if there was a train, and upon it there was a murder? Well, what happened is, no one knew who had done it, and there was a detective on board. It comes up to the detective to solve it. I'm listening, Amory said, and he was listening very closely. What ends up happening is that there was no one person responsible for the murder. It had been something done by everyone on board, other than the detective. They all had a part in it, so in the end, it was no one's fault. They all shared in the end their respective guilt, but they really did not share their responsibility for the crime. In the end, you have a far-reaching story about the power and danger of group thinking, getting caught up in ideas. The same way socialism can lead one to make mistakes in one's thinking. And you have a story about the nature of criminal responsibility, and about who deserves punishment for things that may have been out of their control. Amory wanted to take back what he had said earlier, because that was by far the smartest thing he had ever heard. Richard, now that was the most fascinating thing that I have ever heard. Why, thank you, Amory. Now there is a novel that would be worth writing. Amory paused for a minute, thinking about what he was going to say. Then he said, say if I were to use that thought experiment, that very story, as the basis for my novel, what would you say? Let's say that story is so unique and fresh that I think I must use it, and let my writing talent bring it to life in the way only a brilliant writer can. Richard considered it for a moment. Then he said, that would be more than all right. In fact, I don't need anything for it. Depending on how your novel turns out, though, perhaps you might say your ideas were influenced by Dr. Richard Diver. Now that is certainly something I can do, Amory said. I'd be more than happy to. Excellent, Richard said. Amory could not wait to get started on the new novel. He would probably throw away what he had previously written, though he thought he'd keep the main character for this next story. The dinners were halfway gone, and I'm sure to ask Amory, so Amory, do you enjoy the ski lodge? Well, yes, the lodge you own is absolutely marvelous. Isn't that right, Ginevra? Of course, I really enjoyed it. Mind you, I was so drunk. I can barely remember the color of it. Haha, excellent, Richard said. Rosemary quite enjoyed your company. I quite had, Rosemary said. Although I enjoy our sober lifestyle, sometimes it takes a real bender to get the most fun out of things. I quite agree, though don't quote me as saying so, Ginevra responded. The patrons ate their dinner and then a dessert, with good appetites, and they talked and talked until it was finally time for Amory and Ginevra to return home and put their child to sleep. They rode home in solemn silence, Amory being extra careful not to crash while a little drunk. Sure enough, they pulled up outside their cabin and went inside and to bed safely. The next morning at 6 a.m., Amory roused himself, feeling unable to continue sleeping, while these great ideas continued to swirl in his mind. It was time to write, to get the great ideas down on paper. It was just like in the Triangle Club, when he had smoked cigarette after cigarette, writing from the end of classes until the next morning. Presently he smoked a cigarette and typed furiously on his typewriter, the same one he had used in college at Princeton. Starting a novel did not mean just hammering out page after page of the story, but it sort of meant that. The first 2 chapters Amory knew by heart just after the drive home from Richard's cabin. After that, it was a process of stopping to outline, furiously typing notes on each scene, and then furiously typing out the scenes themselves. In terms of the work itself, it was part the best literary work of his career, part the best thriller anyone had ever read. That was what he aimed to write. In a way, it was the most excruciatingly difficult work. Every second, you're using all your creativity to come up with the most interesting scene in the best language. You wanted to quit, partly from the cigarettes, and of course the coffee, because of the sheer determination to write the great novel. You kept writing. You think it'd go on forever, but then you're free, and you spend months living it up, and searching for that inspiration for the next great novel. It was coming together. The main character, Hercule Poirier, had the ego and confidence that made him a typical character of Amory's. He was a hero. He had all the skill to solve any crime, and could do anything in the field of forensic science on the world stage. There was a man whose superior position in his field Amory meant to draw from to shape Hercule, and it was Richard Diver. Richard was excellent at solving problems. He had that intellectual ability that made him able to find answers where no one else had. It made him worth writing about. Amory vaguely wondered whether he should ask Richard about writing a book about him. He'd make for a fascinating study, and if Richard's new book proved successful, it'd be a highly compelling piece. a semi-fictional novel about the most successful psychiatrist in the world. Now that would be great literature. This is assuming it worked out, as Richard's new discoveries easily could make him the preeminent scholar in psychology. The possibility titillated Emery's mind. Think of the money, the champagne, the admiration that could result from such a work of fiction. It was unbelievable. Sometimes the power of fiction, represented by what the earnings could bring to him, made Emery revere literature. For now, he just worked little bits of Richard into the character, and he also used Richard's theories to craft the plot, and especially all the little mini points of the plot. He used the completed plot Richard had given to him to the T. Everything else was just how to get from one point to the next. For the character Edward Ratchet, Emery used bits of himself, but the character was driven by an avarice and immorality that Emery strongly felt was not himself. The character was also far stupider than Emery. This was more or less confirmable. Emery lovingly wrote sections where the character boozed and seduced women. For the female character, Mary Debenham, Emery used bits of Ginevra, but much of what made up the character had to do with her function in the plot, what caused her to do what she needed to do for the plot, as well as what caused her psychological motivations, had to do more with what cultural elements informed her character rather than the parts informed by Ginevra. Emery checked the clock and it was 2 a.m. The next time he checked the clock, it was 6 a.m. Just like at Princeton, he had written through the entire night again. What he had come up with was almost 100 pages, written in his best hand, at least the best given how short a time he had written it. There would be plenty of time for editing later, but it was one hell of a start, perhaps a third of the novel, already written. Emery went to bed. He found Ginevra dozing heavily, perhaps still a little drunk. He undressed quietly, and got in bed beside her. He noticed she had set the alarm for a little later, 8:30, and he thought that would do fine for him. He fell asleep.